Hi, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
We've been doing this podcast now for a couple of years. We're 150 plus episodes deep. Do you think maybe it's time we evolved our content a little bit?
Jim, that's not a bad idea. There's a lot of bands that have done that and they've had tremendous success. In fact, I think we need to go with the trend. How about two guys talking about crochet? Hello and welcome to Two Guys Talking About Crochet. Oh no,
Records.
forget it. We're still at records. We'll decide at the end of this. But yes, we are two guys talking about records. The records that you want to hear, or at least the ones that we feel you want to hear. But my name is Steve, and I am a record collector.
My name's Jim, and I own a record store, not a crochet store, but you never know. I guess if this thing
Yeah,
falls through, that resurgence, if that doesn't go, let's see, World
that's
Crochet Day, where people line up for the latest stitches. I think it's a
like
go.
stitches and yarn. We got some
Oh,
special yarn on
limited
sale.
edition yarn coming up.
It seems to be all the rage out there right now. They show people at concerts and that. I was at a church when we were visiting my mom. There was a gal there. She just crocheted through the whole story. She didn't even stand up when you're supposed to. She was just crocheting away, man.
I think we may be on to something. But in the meantime, how about we just talk about records? I think that's what we're good
All
at.
right. Yeah. Probably be best for us too. Yes.
Well, if you folks haven't quite guessed yet, today on the podcast, we will be talking about evolution. Bands that have changed over time. Yes, in some cases personnel wise, but more than anything, their sound. What they started with is not what they ended up with or what they did in the interim. This covers a lot of decades too. And right smack dab in the middle of this was this thing called disco, which interrupted everything.
And there was a number of them that thought, hey, let's give that a shot.
Either way, we'll
Yep.
cover some of our favorite bands that have evolved over time. Some in a short amount of time. They had a big impact in a very small amount of time. So we'll get into that here in a little bit on today's episode. But first, as we do each and every week, Steve and I like to cover our most recent pickups and additions to the ever-growing collections. The purge is still happening, right, Steve? I mean, every week you're adding more in, but theoretically you're purging.
Theoretically, I'm purging. I've gotten through I have soul, jazz, blues, and country classical left. So I've gotten through a lot of it, and it's about 170 albums. Probably need to do more, but we'll see.
It's a process.
It is. It's a process. Maybe I'll get a bigger record room. I
There
don't know.
you go. Well, on the backside of the purge, though, while this is happening, you're still adding in. So, what kind of goodies do you have for us this week?
Well, I have some here. Yes, Jim. We'll start with a group called Golden Hours. And this is Golden Hours' second album, Beyond Wires. How about that? This is from Fuzz Club. It's
Oh,
one of my Fuzz Club's
nice looking.
records of the month. Yeah, what's interesting is this group has members of Brian Jonestown's Massacre, of the Fuzz Tones, of Gang of Four, and one other person from another group. So kind of a super group.
Kind of an alternative supergroup there.
Yeah, it's a lot of post rock, I would say. There is a lot of hard noise that comes at you, but underneath it, there's actually melody. You just have to get underneath the noise that's coming at you and knocking you. So this is one, it's taken me a little bit to, shall we say, get into it. I'm struggling a little bit with it. Not bad, but I'm not going, God, I got to play that again. Like, some of these Fuzz Club records, I just, I won't even put away. This one, we're working on. Work in progress.
Okay. We'll stay up to date with you.
Yep. Then, let me put that. I've got that in the wrong spot. You just had shown this on your with new
Oh,
releases,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
I did order from the band site, Alton Gun. Alton Goon, I guess. Alton Goon. Who knows? Garip. And this is, from the label, from their site, so it's a different color vinyl. kind of cool. Uh, this is my fourth album I've had from them. I think it's their sixth album overall. Turkish psych, folk psych, even a little bit of, should we say, world type music. On this one, they concentrate on a specific Turkish musician and lyricist. And so the guy's name, I'm sure I'm going to say this right. Neset Ertas. I've no doubt that is exactly right. But they look at his music and do it. There is some really trippy psych in here, but there's also some slower tunes, a little folkier as they look at this gentleman's body of work. Very enjoyable. I'm liking this thing. I know you had listened to some. You're kind of on the fence on that, but big surprise. I'm kind of going, oh, wow, that's pretty good. So, yeah, interesting stuff. I really do like this group. Not a completist because I'm missing 2 albums. Just, I want you to know that, Jim.
There we go. When we put that in our new release video a couple of weeks back, I thought, man, this sounds like it is up Steve's alley, just a little bit, maybe around the corner from the alley.
Yeah, I had one of them damn emails come through. Hey, this is going to be coming out. Oh, well. And then as Jim's showing, I'm going, did I buy that or not? I should really write down this stuff. This is Jesse Ed Davis, Keep Me Coming, American Indian, Native American from Oklahoma. He put out about 5-6 albums in the 70s. This has the strip on here. It also came with a free bonus 7-inch LP. So this is a rare one. I was at some record store. Oh, it was down in my, I think I found this down in my honey hole in Bogey, Bogey's West. It is psych rock, blues rock, country rock.
Huh.
You have all that kind of mixed in here. It is his 4th album. This is for demonstration, not for sale. They tattooed it right on his pants very nicely there. So that was good. But yeah, this is this one with the fine because it just came out specially for not, it was not for resale.
Radio only, probably.
Kind of
That's what the timing strip is.
Yeah, I'd have to say so. So cool stuff. Just one of those things. Once in a while, you pop in a record store, and there it is. Not the cheapest album, but I thought that was pretty interesting. Got my second album from this group, Glixen. Last year, I think I showed an album, their new stuff from Glixen. It's called Quiet Pleasures. Glixen, shoegaze, noise rock. It says quiet pleasures. There is nothing quiet about this. It's a wall of sound. It's a little too much of a wall of sound. It just comes screaming at you. Vocals, like a lot of shoegaze, buried down there, a little dreamy sounding, kind of. But yeah, I'm not. I don't know what even color that is, Jim. It's like not even deep red. Mauve. It beats me. Yeah, maybe so. It's kind of what happens to your ears. They start to bleed with this. It is loud. It's really just, let's just turn everything up and let her rip. So, Glick said, quiet pleasures. There's no quietness here. And again, struggling a little bit with that one. And the final one I'm going to show is the very first album from Human Beings. You know, a few weeks back, I showed a different Human Beings. It was their 3rd album. It was their psych album. This one's their garage rock album. It has Nobody But Me on here, which was their seminal hit off Capitol with the rainbow. And let's see, anything else in there? No, there isn't. So this was the very first album, came out. I believe they were from California. I can't remember. They do Foxy Lady on here, which was interesting. And they did pretty good with it. And there are some covers from Carpenter music. I wonder, but some people had mentioned to me about this album, and when they said their hit, I suddenly, Oh, yeah, I remember that song, and it's on various compilations. So I went on Discogs and found it, and I made sure it was one that had a big hole in it because, those are cool.
Yes.
The other one had a giant hole in it too. So, you know, at least as time went, we evolved in the record industry. We made little tiny holes, but
Or
as it was in the
notches, yeah.
60s, we wanted to make sure you saw it was a punch out.
I just
So, good album. Enjoyed this.
cool. I just want to note that garage, the '60s garage rock you picked up, had a Hendrix cover that wasn't "Hey Joe."
Hey, that is a great point. Huh. Boy, kind of makes you wonder if their head was in the right place.
What did they miss out? Well, cool ads, cool ads. I've only got a couple this week on my side. One was a fairly recent album from Yes. This is called The Quest, released in 2021, and this final version I've got is a 2022 one. This is an interesting album. I picked it up from one of our distributors. It was on a clearance sale, and double LP blue vinyl, very nice looking blue vinyl also on this, and it came with a nifty booklet and everything. This is also one of those ones that came with a compact disc of it as well, double CD, which means absolutely nothing to me. But the Quest was this is as I mentioned, it's an interesting one. This is the 22nd studio album by Yes, but it's notable because this was the first album to feature Billy Sherwood since the latter in 1999, after he replaced the founding bassist Chris Squire, who died in 2015. And this is also, Steve, the first Yes album without any of the original members. So
That's what I was going to ask.
yeah,
Is that the first? Is that a Yes album that doesn't have anybody from Yes?
technically yes. I mean, yes. See what I did there? These are guys that have been in the band. These are guys that have been in the band, produced by Steve Howe as well. But overall, I'd give this one a good solid A for effort. For later, yes, it's Yes sounding like an old Yes. They're really trying to recapture. I mean, right down to the artwork and everything. There looks great, by the way, but they're really trying to recapture that old flavor of Yes, and it's so close. It kind of works. I can see why this was on clearance, but needless to say, I got one for the store as well. I am not a Yes completist, but I'm probably close, and would not normally have picked that up, except for the great sale that it was. I'm glad I did, and I'll hold on to it for a while until the time comes for me to purge, and that'll be probably at the top of the list. It's good, but it's just not great. Is that a good way to put it? I don't mean to.
Yeah.
I don't mean to harp on Yes fans, but there we go. I am a Yes fan, but their older stuff, man, really dig that prog. Okay, secondly, I've added a piece of classical to the Michigan collection at the same time. I'm going to get the pronunciation of my composers correct here. Ravel and Chabris on one side or the other, but notable because this is the Detroit Symphony Orchestra doing Ravel's Bolero on one side of this. And this is a 1958 pressing from Mercury Records. Decent shape. It's got that old maroon Mercury logo on it. A little poppy and cracky in there, but I'm going to give this a good scrubbing in the VPI. Occasionally, I'll grab a lot of these Detroit Symphony records when I see them and pull them aside if they're in decent shape, because I do get a kick out of classical once in a while. But Ravel, of course, Bolero, the biggest of the compositions from, I clicked the wrong thing there, from Maurice Ravel, French composer. But the backside of this, a composer I'm completely unfamiliar with, Emmanuel Chabris, was a French romantic composer, born in 1841 and died in 1894. I am absolutely, totally, and completely unfamiliar with his work, so I'll have to do some digging in on that. But I just kind of gave this the cursory listen on the Ravel side, just to kind of make sure that the quality was up to par. But I've got a few Detroit Symphony records, some of the stuff they've done. It's beautiful music, and again, I get that classical mood once in a while. We can dive into that. So,
when I think Bolero, Dudley Moore Bo Derek.
Yes, that's where you go right there.
There we go.
Well, as we do each and every week, we'll put together a playlist of the music that we talk about, both in our pickups and in the larger conversation here. I don't know if I'm going to actually be able to find the Detroit Symphony Orchestra version of Ravel, but we'll put something up regardless. You can find a link to that playlist that we mentioned. It is a Spotify playlist. We'll put that in the description of our episodes, both here on the YouTube side of things as well as over on the BLEAVE Podcast Network, and subsequently down into Spotify and Apple, iHeart, all of those. You'll find that link in the description. And you can listen in as well. So one of the things, Steve, that I think that we are going to work on is evolving. I don't know as if we're going to talk about crocheting. I'm not an expert. Don't think I'll ever be an expert in that. I just don't have the finger chops, if you will. I can spin a record with the best of them, but as far as putting together a blanket or a hat or anything, I'm not there. So I'm not going to evolve, Steve. I think I'm going to stick with records, if that's okay with you.
That's fine. Instead, we'll talk about groups that really showed evolution in music, like the Ramones and AC/DC, who were just phenomenal at it.
What was the quote we always bring up that Angus Young said, supposedly said about AC/DC's music? You know, he once got some criticism that AC/DC has 20 albums that all sound alike, and he says, "Hey, we've got 25 albums that all sound alike. Thank you very much." Now, that's not true for all bands, especially if you get an artist or a group that has any amount of longevity. And we're getting into the time frame now where some of these older bands that are still kicking it out are 50 plus years into the mix. And so it's going to be inevitable that over time their sound is going to change, unless of course you're AC/DC. You're going to stick with it, or other bands like that. But there are numerous other bands and artists that have evolved, and as times change, as society change, their music sometimes tends to reflect that era. And it's a good thing, it's a bad thing, it's a I don't know thing, for me at least sometimes. I don't know where you stand on that. Is it good for an artist or a band to do this?
I think for most, it's important to try to be relevant. They look at trends. They try to keep up with it in hoping that new people will come in. You know, if you keep the same, you'll keep your same fan base. But they want to bring in more new people, so they have to change. Sometimes it's from them. Sometimes it's the record label saying, you need to change it up.
Or maybe they're assigned a producer that is a hot producer at that point in time that says, here is a better reflection of what today's sound is, and whatever that happens to be. You know, I joked earlier about disco, but I think that there's no getting around the massive cultural influence that disco had in the mid-'70s, especially on a lot of these earlier 60s psych bands or even the earlier pop rock bands that came through. It's unmistakable. And in some cases, and I'll pick on the Bee Gees first here, it's unmistakable where you get a band that comes in, it's kind of this soft rock psych band, and then they're just absolutely overwhelmed, and now they're known for predominantly their disco work.
Yeah, it trapped them into that. Well, Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is, at least that trap produced a lot of checks in the mail.
Yeah. You know, when we talk about evolution, though, too, on the backside of saying, okay, this is something that's very recognizable in bands that have been around for 30, 40, and in some cases 50 years. And as I said, it's inevitable that their sound could move and change with the decades as they go through. But I think one of the best examples of an artist's evolution, a band's evolution, happened in a relatively short span, all things considered. I mean, they had a good run, but a relatively short span compared to other bands. And I'm speaking first and foremost of the Beatles. And I think that this is a glaring and fabulous example of how one's sound can change. Now, I'd argue that perhaps there were some outside pharmaceutical elements that helped the Beatles modify their sound. But I mean, when you're coming up in the early, 1960, but 1962-ish with the Fab Four as we know them, picking up on a lot of that early blues and R&B sound and then molding into their pop sound that they have. And then by the end of the 60s, they are straight up psychedelic rock, straight and through. A couple of the records that I pulled to illustrate this are not Beatles albums per se, but compilation albums. And I think both the music and the artwork on their two compilations, the Red and the Blue album, really show that kind of evolution. Granted, the photography on them shows the Beatles. The Red album, of course, from 1962 through 1966 in their music. And then the Blue album, the Blue compilation, 67 through 1970. It really kind of shows that the band, in that short amount of time, evolved not only just individually as members, but musically as a group. And that encapsulates perfectly in these two compilations.
I remember when those came out, and I brought my dad over and says, I want this Beatles Red album. I did not want one because they looked like a bunch of scary people on that Blue album, long hair and beards, and that was not a Nebraska thing. And I just asked I want this Red album.
Even though you could turn the Red album over and see that picture.
Yeah, I didn't get that far with it. And so I showed it, put it in his hands, just want this for Christmas, and he gave me the Partridge Family instead.
Well, you could step into them eventually. But, and
Thanks,
again,
Dad.
we're talking less than a decade for the Beatles not only to have that kind of transformation amongst themselves, but something that transformed artists down the line, many, many other artists influenced by them at all stages of their development.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of two groups in the 70s that had major changes, you could say, in the 80s, Heart and Cheap Trick. They're both good hard rock bands, 70s and 80s. I mean, 70s, but come the 80s, they began to change up their sounds, especially Heart. More synths came in,
Yep.
power ballads. What's Cheap Trick's biggest thing, when they came up with the power ballads in the 70s?
They
Big
turned
difference.
into the top 40 machine for both of them. And I've got another
Yeah.
group we'll get to in a bit that I think really illustrates that one as well.
I had mentioned sometimes record companies, are the crux to say, and I just want to put this one up. You had Howlin' Wolf,
Yeah.
50s, 60s, some of the greatest blues in the whole wide world. But the world was changing. And Howlin' Wolf was revered by so many bands. But people weren't buying the music. It was old-timey. So the record company said, you need to work with Eric Clapton and all these other hotshot people. And so they came up with the London sessions, which Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, and Bo Diddley all had to do that, updating their sound and hoping to get the young people buying it. The purists were pissed. They go, that's not right. But it was a record company decision, and these albums were panned for so long. Now people like them. I mean, I don't mind them, but it was a big change for these blues artists, and they weren't happy about it either. Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, probably Bo Diddley was. He was changing his stuff anyway. He did an album called Gladiator that's really out there. So, but that was a case of record company.
Well, the record company, I think companies were looking at how do we get some profit out of this, and there's so much.
Oh yeah,
especially with the young in the late '60s, they're looking to Clapton, they're looking to Page, and they're looking at a lot of these blues influenced artists and said this is going to be a match made in heaven if we could get these old blues guard in with these new Brit blues especially, and we'll get the best of both worlds, which translates into some profits.
Jethro Tull, they started off as a blues band.
Yep.
Very blues, British blues. A couple members left and they changed, and Aqualung came out. Then their Prague album, Thick as a Brick. Of course, this was their let's make fun of. It's Prague. Everyone kept saying Aqualung was. They said, no, it's not. All right, let's just do a Prague album. Shut them up. So they did Thick as a Brick. But then they changed to more what you called Elizabethan folk rock. I had Heavy Horses, Songs from the Wood, Minstrel in the Gallery. Big change for them. Then as the 80s started, they came out with Under Wraps, which I don't have a copy of. I used to, which everyone hated because it was their electronic synthesizer So that didn't go well. So instead, we did like Crest of the Knave, and they get the Grammy for best metal album,
Yeah.
and beat Metallica out.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so there's some dramatic change for you in a group, and by then, most all the original members are gone. When Martin Barr left, the guitarist, it really changed. It was just an Ian Anderson, solo project, and we'll bring in some people here and there. So, yeah, I never went further with them.
Well, you talk about a lot of these artists in the mid 60s starting as blues influenced bands, and in a lot of cases, cover albums. Another one, let's go back to the Rolling Stones. These guys, I think, they had the longevity where the Beatles did not, but they have the same kind of, I think, influence and just overall effect on just culture in general, albeit over a longer period of time than the Beatles had. The Beatles, I think, were bigger, but in a shorter amount of time. But the Stones overall, and some of their early albums, England's newest hitmaker, the U.S. version that I've got, is predominantly cover tunes of older R&B and blues standards. Route 66 ish. I'll go on there. Little by Little, I'm a King Bee. Can I Get a Witness on here, and Walking the Dog. But the Stones overall, what now, 31 studio albums to get you from England's newest hitmakers all the way to Hackney Diamonds. I would argue, and again, I probably might take a little heat on this, I think once the Stones changed their sound after the first couple of albums in the mid 60s, by about 66 or so, they became the Rolling Stones. And then that is kind of where they stayed. Yes, they would put out some odd, even Black and Blue was almost a reggae album in spots. You can tell that there's some disco influence in through there from time to time. But I think that their sound remained predominantly, oh yeah, that's the Rolling Stones. Even to their modern stuff,
Yeah.
like Hackney Diamonds from 23, you recognize them as the Rolling Stones through that. So I don't think their sound evolved much after that initial evolution in the mid 60s when they got away from that blues influenced cover tune.
The one thing I remember from the mid 70s is when the Stones added the disco beat into some of their songs. When songs like Miss You, it is such a heavy disco beat. It hit the dance floors, but that was their ploy. It was still Stones, but definitely a beat was going on there, and it became huge in the discos. I know, I was there in the discos.
In the discos. Well, again, we mentioned that earlier, just that overall effect that disco music had on other genres. It's like, well, we're going to take advantage of a little bit of that. We're not going to go straight up disco, but we're going to infuse that into our sound. And that's true of the Stones. That's true of a lot of other bands of that era as well.
One group I want to bring up is Talking Heads. They started with punk, not real punk, but definitely different. Okay, CBGBs. But they began to involve. Brian Eno becomes involved a lot. So we have, Fear of Music, a lot trippier. Then Remain in Light, where they bring in sounds of world music. And again, brand new kind of sounds. David Byrne and Eno did My Life in the, Bush, which was a heavy influence on here. Then they went more pop. And so we have Speaking in Tongues, very top 40.
Yep.
Not nearly as experimental as the previous albums. This one is what most people like because it's, kind of the hits. They moved a little more folky with this one here. And again, that is, gee whiz.
Speaking in Tongues.
This one's Little Creatures.
Little Creatures. I'm sorry, yep.
Yeah. Little Creatures, a little more folkier. And also they wore paisley outfits on the back cover. And then even like Talking Heads, Naked. They changed their sound again, but this was more just David Byrne. I mean, by now, the other Talking Heads really had no say. This is like a David Byrne solo album, in my opinion. Not nearly as good as the other ones. And for some reason, I bought it. Maybe I guess I'm going to complete some Talking Heads.
In some cases, like with that, with the Talking Heads thing, you'd have to be a completist to want all of them. And how often do you dive to those latter ones? And you're sticking primarily with their experimental and punkish ones, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I do. I up to Remain in Light. It was those four I like the best.
I'm going to dip backwards into the 60s again because we talked about that the early British acts really kind of kicking into the blues, a lot of the American blues. But there's a couple of groups I think that illustrate the idea that they're going to draw from the rhythms of some American R&B groups at that time, not necessarily blues, but then melded into something called mod in the mid 60s. And I'm talking predominantly of the Kinks forming in 1963, I believe, and the Who coming in 64. A lot of their earlier albums from both the Kinks and the Who, I think, represented that mod sound of the British rock. It was that really kind of a crossover between R&B and pop with a little bit of rock in them. And then each of these groups, I think over time, the Kinks as well, they go their separate way to get a little more prog and a little more what's the word I'm looking for? Really kind of getting into that prog side of things, but they do some conceptual albums. And then into the 80s, unmistakable, that 80s Brit pop sound, I think, with a lot of the Kinks albums. It's almost punk in spots, but it's not. And infused. But then, of course, you've got the Who, which go from that mod sound, the early R&B influenced mod, to just the straight up rock sounds you get on Who's Next, for example. Just great rock and roll. And then they tried their hand even in a couple of different rock operas, Quadrophenia and Tommy, which are more long form prog, symphonic prog sounds in some cases. So you've got that evolution of the Who. Now, both of these, the Kinks not so much anymore, but the Who, in pretty much just Daltrey and Pete Townsend, are still kind of going at it, but they're leaning predominantly on a lot of their older stuff and hitting all of their eras, so to speak, with their current, their recent tours.
To me, the ultimate at change in music, and I would argue the very best, is David Bowie.
Oh yeah, yeah.
David Bowie listened to trends and understood trends and understood where to go. So David Bowie, he started with folk rock on his very early albums, just acoustic guitar. But he changed because he heard what was happening. And there's Ziggy Stardust. Suddenly we got glam rock happening. And I mean, he was so influential. Everyone was dressing up like David Bowie. So we had the glam. Well, guess what? Glam burns out. He sees it. He goes into that Philadelphia sound, and we have Young Americans, the Thin White Duke. Well, he's thin white because that's called cocaine. I mean, God honest truth on that one. But he changed his sound. Now we got horns, and we have more of a soul sound. But that only lasts so long. He gets with Brian Eno. He goes into the Low trilogy, which is very dark, definitely different. And then the 80s, he had Let's Dance. Super top 40. I don't have that one. I don't have a lot of, actually, I have no Bowie. I used to be a kind of completist on Bowie. I had all CDs and that. Now I don't. But I will bring up this one, Tin Machine, his group. Yeah. He went after alt rock, hard rock with Tin Machine. But through the 90s, through the aughts, he changed. Every album was changing on what he was doing because he could hear what others were doing. I mean, that guy was a genius with it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But an absolute incredible at it, while most fail.
Do you think that a lot of collectors, aside from those who are going to be super fans or completists that want every single step of the way in an artist like Bowie, outnumber those that would be more of, I like this era versus I like this era, so I'm going to collect only these? That's kind of seems to be where you are. You want the stuff you want, and you respect him for the other stuff, but you're not going to have that in your collection.
I agree. It's definitely where I'm at because I've heard all the other things, and maybe now I would hear them differently. There are those that David Bowie is God. They're going to have everything. But for me, no, it's certain eras that I want. And I would go up to Let's Dance. And after that, except for Tin Machine, I lost interest. Another A big band was U2. And you talk about changes, U2 was another one. They were listening and trying to update, and they started as kind of punkish. That was how they began, punkish, and then more, I don't know what you would call them, post-punk, Jim,
Veering toward
maybe.
alternative and almost pop 40, maybe.
Yep. But Joshua Tree came out and Rattle and Hum, and suddenly we're looking at Americana. They're dipping into the blues deeply. And also, Edge began wearing big hats with wide brims too, which was different. But, so, and yeah, and they wore cowboy hats. But come the 90s, electronics. And so we began Zeropa, total change, but people loved it. Then we had Octoon Baby,
Yep.
huge album for them. Then they did Pop, which was really electronic, and everyone hated it and said, "You guys suck." That one did not go well. Then they moved into ambient with Passengers. And they call it a soundtrack, but it's not. I mean, then the aughts, they changed. You got like, they went back to more top 40 rock type music with all, U2, all that you can't leave behind. And then I quit buying U2. So, I mean, they've changed still. They continue to change, but some of their later albums, I haven't found as exciting. Again, it's one of those groups. I got 3 decades I really like.
Which of their albums was the one they forced on everybody's iPhone, whether you wanted it or not? It downloaded one day, and
Yeah.
it's one surefire way to turn
I,
off fans that don't want your stuff.
yeah, I still have it on my phone, Jim.
But you can't remember the name of the album?
It was free.
There we go. That's a good enough name.
Yeah, the iPhone album.
So far we've talked about a lot of these artists and bands that have changed, especially the bands, but somehow have remained relatively, not everyone, but relatively stable as far as their personnel go. I mean, yes, you mentioned Tull. It ended up being pretty much just Ian Anderson. The Stones, of course, a little bit of shift here and there. But let's talk now about a band that has been around for a heck of a long time. Started off in a completely different genre than where they ended up with, or where they are most popularity. Speaking mostly now about Fleetwood Mac, and this is due to a lot of personnel changes over the years. So this first Fleetwood Mac came out in 1968, and this was Brit blues at its finest. Peter Green, Mick Fleetwood and company. Spencer was on here. These guys personified that British blues movement in the late 60s, which again harkened back to a lot of the American blues from a lot earlier. But this is a band that has kind of kept itself together in name only, even as the personnel changed. Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, Fleetwood Mac, that gets you through there. But as they progress into the 70s and 80s, they get lots of different folks coming and going through there. Christine McVie joins. They begin incorporating female vocals in. The blues begins to fade itself away until you get to the Christy McVie and Stevie Nicks era, and you've got Rumors, arguably their biggest of all time, from the band, totally and completely eclipsing what they started off with. And moved really after even Rumors into more of a top 40 centric era, like you talked about with Heart. Things softened a little bit. But I'm hard pressed to think of another band that had gone through so many personnel changes and changed their sound dramatically from one genre to a completely different genre without kind of coming full circle and going back again.
No, I totally agree. I mean, when Bob Welch came in, so Peter Green leaves, then comes Bob Welch. That music absolutely changed. Bob Welch wasn't blues at all. You have Bare Trees and, Sentimental Lady, things like that. It totally went to the soft side. And then he left. Then comes Lindsey Buckingham. I mean, there's big changes. Totally agree with that, Jim.
And again, like I said, it's not something that they experimented with and then went back to a core sound. It's something that they just progressed through and through and through as those personnels changed. That's not just rock and roll we're dealing with here, even though you did talk about blues, Steve, early on, and some blues influence in early rockers. But the genre of jazz has seen some artists that have gone radical as far as their changes go over time as well.
Yeah, quite a few. Again, to keep up with the times, you have to change. And, I think Herbie Hancock, how much he changed. Huge shifts and became so popular in the 70s, though I like his 60s stuff better. John Coltrane, from bop into free jazz. Big change. But the one I'm going to show and talk about is Miles Davis, because Miles Davis is God to me. So there we go. You know, you have his early stuff here. This is Miles Davis Volume 2. It's more Charlie Parker. It's bop is happening here. And he has Horace Silver, J.J. Johnson. He has a big group. Trombones and that are in this group. But he changes. He starts his first quintet, and that quintet brought in John Coltrane. And this is a box set. For those of you that are just driving and listening, this is a big, heavy thing I'm lifting up, okay? It's his 50s albums with the first quintet up to Kinda Blue. It's not included in there. But there's, this is where, like Workin', he had a lot of single word albums that came out at that time. So kind of more bebop in here. It's softer, quieter jazz. It's not my favorite period of it. But it's an important group. They did a lot of important things, and they were changing and evolving. But they were moving into modal. And so you get modal on here, which is a whole new concept that Miles Davis had talked about and wanted to do. And one of the greatest album of that is Kinda Blue, which is considered one of the greatest jazz albums ever created. And for me, it's my favorite album of all time. This is the one, Jim. You get throw me on an island, toss me Kinda Blue, and I'll be okay. All right. I'm just fine now. But, it was, and he had Coltrane, Chambers, Evans. This was from his first quintet. And he goes into the second quintet now in the 60s. He's moving from modal more into a hard bop type thing. Still, he has Gil Evans. Gil Evans is orchestrated. He does orchestrated works. Here we got Sketches of Spain, bringing in lush strings, capturing something totally different type jazz. Then they get Gil Evans leaves, and now it's just basically the quintet. You have albums like ESP, more hard bop in there. Now we have Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams, Ron Carter. This is the greatest of all. He's wearing these nice suits and that, and the music's changing. And his girlfriend, soon to be wife, which is Betty Davis. I love her stuff. She says, "Man, you're old, man. You're old fashioned. You need to get with the times, and you need to change up." And it really began to happen in silent way. He added electric instruments. Suddenly, it wasn't acoustic. Now we get electric guitar, electric piano. Herbie Hancock was not happy about this whole electric piano thing, but look where he went with it. But it blew up with Bitches Blue. Bitches Brew. Suddenly it was paisley, bright colors, huge broad hats, bell bottoms, and funk. And the music changed. And this was due to his wife. You have to change. He brought in a whole new type of music for the 70s. And you had jazz fusion that exploded. No one wanted to hear the old jazz, and Bitches Brew. And he put out a number of albums with that kind of group. And that worked for a while until he was so coked out and he had to go, he just stopped and disappeared. And when he came back, trying to keep up with the times, this is Miles Davis, and this is You're Under Arrest. Yeah, he wasn't playing the trumpet very much. He was more playing the keys on there, just making sounds. He was just, hey, I'm Miles Davis. Here's my band, and away they go. But he was trying to keep up. I don't think as successful.
Well, and that I think is a great example too of somebody that carries over a couple of decades and is influenced by outside influences. You mentioned Betty Davis really kind of
Mhm.
playing a big thing, but where do you stand as far? I mean, obviously with Kind of Blue, that's the sweet spot for you. So you've got your Miles Davis, and I've thus avoided so far talking about Rush, but I want to get into this as we go through because this is one of those groups that has lasted numerous decades, 40 plus, 50 now, as we're heading into their 50th year, where their sound has changed, their personnel has changed, but it only changed after this first album from 74 with John Rutsey on drums and then Neil Peart coming in for the balance. But that, and I don't want to rehash too much. We did an entire episode of Rush where I was trying to convince you to be a Rush fan. So we don't have to revisit. But this to me is one of those bands that I've stuck with. And yes, I'll be a completist on, even though there are certain eras of the band that are less favorite for me, ones that I don't go to very often. But you've got a band that started off hard rock, heavy rock, really kind of a Zeppelin influenced type of band with, I don't even want to call it blues, but it was more acid rock with their first self titled album. And then moving into their prog era where things got very intricate. I won't show everything, but Hemispheres I think is very um, representative of that era. Very long songs, conceptual songs and albums with 2112, for example, on that side. But things get a lot more intricate, and then keys become in there. Uh, my favorite era, I did not pull, obviously, Permanent Waves, when you've got more of the radio friendly, shorter songs. Still hard rock, but minimal amount of keyboards. The least favorite time for me is when Rush dipped into the mid 80s and they got very, very keyboard centric. And I know a lot of Rush fans will also point to that, but there are some that say that this is their great era. But this is also, I think, very representative of that electronic keyboard sound of the mid 80s that they got into. Now,
Mhm.
Rush for me came full circle with their last two albums, especially Snakes and Arrows and then Clockwork Angels, where they returned to that super hard rock sound. The vocals were toned down a little bit because of I think Getty's range was coming down a little bit toward that era, but very hard rock oriented. And then with their last studio album, Clockwork Angels, they did come full circle with that hard rock sound and the conceptual album, where the entire thing is a double LP concept album. Now, we all know, most of you do at least, that Rush is reformed with a new drummer, Annika Niles, and they're touring. And I am going to be seeing one of those shows. I'll talk about that as we get closer, Steve. I did cave in, and we're going to be going to one of the shows. But amidst all of that, there's now rumors. Somebody asked Geddy Lee about whether or not they'd be releasing another album under this new lineup with Annika Niles. He says they are working on some stuff, and he's not ruling it out, but he said he wants to see if they survive the tour first. And if there is, so they're up there. But they also just announced that that tour, by the way, is going into 2027. They added tours in Europe and South America. So we'll have to see if Rush does come out with a new album. It will be their first album since that 1974 one that does not feature lyrics written by Neil Peart, unless they've squirreled some
Yeah.
away. We'll have to see what that does to them musically, if that changes them yet again. Jury's out on that. I don't know where I'd stand, but we'll have to see. But regardless, I think that that's another group that shows that whether it be through personnel changes or just time itself, that evolution, whether it be cyclical like Rush did or linear, as I mentioned, like with Fleetwood Mac, where once they change, they don't change back. I think it is important for bands to undergo that, especially if they want longevity.
Yeah. I remember when Kiss tried to change twice. They came out with the Elder that was symphonic and had all this stuff, and people were up in arms. I think some cities were burned down to the ground because of it. But now people search for that album. They search for it. They're looking for it. Yeah, this is really good, but holy cow! And then of course Kiss took off their paint. Does that consider a change, Jim?
I would
They
think
pull up the
maybe
paint,
they're trying to grow and
trying
change a
to
little. Only to
trying to
kind of
grow and change.
only to go back toward the end of their career, didn't they?
Yeah, because I guess they thought, well, people actually don't want to see our faces. They just want to see us looking. like we did in the 70s.
And again, I don't know. Well, and again, Steve, we didn't really talk about more contemporary bands. I don't know if time will tell that there's going to be any of these, ones that have come up in the 2000s that are going to undergo those kind of transformative changes. I frankly don't know where musical genres can go too much more from here. You get certain bands, and we've talked about Wet Leg, that are kind of redefining their sound, but I don't know how that's going to change. Oh, Beck. Well, there we go. There's a good contemporary example. We didn't get to Beck, calling that up. To me, though, Beck, you get something where he starts with his Mellow Gold and Loser, which is, to me, just straight up alternative music. But when it comes to Beck, I think he was more of an album centric, and it wasn't so much of I'm changing my sound based upon current societal trends or my mood. Whereas I think this album I want to be an 80s funk. This album I want to be acoustic mellow. This album I want to be alternative. This album I want to be hip hop. Do you get that out of Beck? I think he's more of a.
I see that. I can see for Beck, it's what he's listening to, and he gets into something. It's not what's necessarily going on right now, popular. It's just, God, I've been listening to a lot of 80s. I want to do that.
And he's successful with those, and a couple of them even end up being Grammy Award winners. All right, Steve, I think we've proven that evolution is a fact of life. Darwin reference there if you want. But is it something that's good for artists and bands to undergo?
I think overall it is, and I think they need to, and it brings us new music. We don't always like it, but look at 20, 30 years later. Suddenly we go, God, that's really good. It's just at the time we have this love. I like that last album. Why'd you change it? But if you're an artist, doesn't that get boring after a while, unless you're AC/DC?
That's a great way to put it. We'll have to wait and see if AC/DC puts out a hip-hop album in the next couple of years and see how the fans handle that. Either way. Well, you folks have been listening and watching two guys talking about records, a Vinyl Community podcast. Very curious to see what you think. Is there some bands that we've missed and artists that we've missed that have evolved? And are there some that evolved so much that they lost you and you say, you know what, I'm done. Not going back to listen to that because I just can't handle that anymore. Or are there some that have redeemed themselves and come back full circle? Please let us know in the comments section of your preferred listening and watching platform. Always happy to see those. So, Steve, I think that I'm going to evolve myself into a store owner here and get things open and running very shortly.
That's maybe I'll evolve myself into taking a nap before I head to my shop.
There we go. Always appreciate it.
Go for a walk.
Well, until next time, you folks, as we mentioned, have been listening to two guys talking about records. My name is Jim, and I own a record store.
I am Steve, and I'm a record collector. Thank you for dropping by again.
Yeah, good one, Steve. Thanks, everyone.